Hey everybody, this is Matthew Soltesiak and you're listening to Not the Same Old Lions podcast. Using my sportscasting background, I speak with a variety of guests and interview key players to gain more insight on what makes this team go. As the Detroit Lions enter a new gritty era, we'll look beyond just the kneecaps when it comes to the analysis. Welcome to another episode. Today we're going with a different format than many of you are used to. I'm rocking the show solo today as I dive into a very important question Lions fans need to be asking themselves right now. And I'm going to want your thoughts after the show ends. What do you think? You can share those thoughts with me on Twitter, at Matt Soltesiak. My last name, it's too long to use Matthew, so it's at Matt, Soltyisak. So here we go. The big question for everyone today is Jared Goff the new Jim Caldwell to Lions fans? And is that really a concern? Should that be a concern? I want to know what you think. I also want to know what former Lions quarterback Dan Orlovsky thinks, because I think he could provide some very good insight to the future at quarterback for the Detroit Lions. And we're going to get into that a little bit later as well. So what do I mean by is Jared Goff the new Jim Caldwell? Well, it feels like there were three camps of Lions fans when it came to Jim Caldwell's career. A number of fans liked Caldwell. There were some that were indifferent to seeing him go, and others who were happy to see him go. All of this despite some pretty good coaching numbers. Now, when it comes to Jared Goff, there are two very different camps from Lions fans, and maybe a sub-camp as well. One camp says, he's pretty good. I think we can win with this guy with a good group around him. Then there's another group that says, he's okay, but we're not going to win a Super Bowl with him. And there might be a small subgroup. I like what I'm seeing so far, but let's wait and let's see one more year before we make a final decision. So is Jared Goff Jim Caldwell, but in the quarterback spot and not the head coaching spot? And more importantly, should Lions fans be in a hurry to move on from Jared Goff, or is he underappreciated? And maybe heed some caution from the past. So let's understand Jim Caldwell a little bit better before we break down Jared Goff. Jim Caldwell coached before he came to the Lions. It wasn't his first rodeo. He coached in Indianapolis from 2009 to 2011. And his first year there, he took the Colts to the Super Bowl. They went 14-2. They lost the Super Bowl to the Saints. And some would say, well, he was riding on the coattails of Tony Dungy. They had built a great team. Maybe, maybe not. The last two seasons where Tony Dungy was the head coach, the Colts actually were one and done in the playoffs. So that was 07 and 08. Then in Caldwell's first season, they went 14-2. In Caldwell's second season with the Colts, they dropped to 10-6. They lost their first playoff game and were knocked out immediately. In the third season, they dropped all the way to 2-14. And right there, you're sitting here thinking, how did they regress so much? Well, you got to remember, at that point, Peyton Manning literally could not throw a football, or at least not throw it very far. So the Colts went into that season with Curtis Painter as their starting quarterback, and Kerry Collins played as well. I believe he was in his late 30s at that point. Those guys didn't win any games. Dan Orlovsky was actually on that squad, and he won a couple of games. And we're going to get back to Dan Orlovsky a little bit later. So Jim Caldwell's gone after 3 seasons in Indianapolis. After a little bit of time off, he joins the Detroit Lions in 2014. He coaches in Detroit for 4 years. He goes 11-5, 7-9, 9-7, 9-7. Caldwell coached the Lions to some of their best records in the past 25 years. And yes, 9-7 qualifies as some of the Lions' best records. I went and researched that. He was 11-5 in his first season with the Lions in 2014, and that was the Lions' best season, and still to date is the best season since Wayne Fontes was the head coach in 1991 when the Lions went 12-4. In Caldwell's 4-year stretch with Detroit, it's also their best stretch since Wayne Fontes was the coach in the early 90s. So, the Lions fans who were in favor of Caldwell, fans of Caldwell, thought he was their best coach since the 90s. He kept us competitive. Bob Quinn made him a scapegoat, saying that 9-7's not good enough. Well, let's pause for a minute there. I don't think Caldwell would tell you that 9-7's good enough either. But many fans, potentially even Caldwell, would argue that 9-7 wasn't bad enough. Most fans of Caldwell think he should not have been fired. Since 1973, only 2 coaches have a winning record for the Detroit Lions. Now, obviously, before that time, there are multiple because the Lions were really good in the 50s. Jim Caldwell at 36-28, and Gary Moeller at 4-3. Those are the only two coaches that have a winning record for the Lions. Now, we know Wayne Fontes is the winningest coach with 66 wins, but he's also the losingest coach with 67 wins in Lions history. Now, other supporters of Caldwell could point to his roster. He had a great roster his first 2 years. 2014 actually was his only roster with Ndamukong Suh and Nick Fairley. So some bad GM decisions led to the decline of the roster. It would take some hits. Now, was that Caldwell's fault? Is it Caldwell's fault that the Lions drafted a tight end instead of Aaron Donald? Or that the Dallas playoff game in his first year, was it his fault that a pass interference flag was picked up? Or that Calvin Johnson was missed wide open on the same play? If the Lions win that game, does this story go in a different direction? I mean, look what direction the team went after he was fired. Now, there are people who were against keeping Caldwell, and they thought it was time to get rid of him. They would say Caldwell was not going to take the team past a wild card. He was a great players coach, but poor game management. Now, I'd like to note that Wayne Fontes was known as a great players coach as well. They say Caldwell was a good leader. He beat the bad teams, but he couldn't beat the good ones. He lacked a fire on the sideline, that he had hit his ceiling with the club. The running game got worse each year, and Stafford struggled in Caldwell's first year. And that coordinators were not held accountable. And that right there might have been a big part of the issue. Do you remember that Thursday night game in 2015 against the Green Bay Packers? That was the Aaron Rodgers Hail Mary pass. The Lions had players at the 30-yard line playing defense while the Hail Mary was being thrown. So offensive and defensive coordinators definitely played a part on the coaching staff. Now, Bob Quinn and Matt Patricia, they were a disaster. Now, does that influence Lions fans' thoughts on Jim Caldwell? Have they changed their thoughts on him because of that? Because it was so bad after Caldwell? Does that make him look better than he was? Remember this, though. Guys like Darius Slay and Condre Diggs, they probably would not have been traded sub-value for what they were if Bob and Matt were not running the show. So there would have been much more talent on this roster. Ask Philadelphia and Seattle how thankful they are for those deals that they got from the Detroit Lions and how much better those made their teams. Also, some would say just because Patricia and Quinn were bad, that doesn't mean the Lions didn't need to move on from Caldwell. They just chose poorly when they moved on. So what does all of this mean? Well, we had a team with the Lions that appeared to be getting their stuff together. Under Caldwell, they finished in second place 3 times and third place once in their division those 4 years. Now, admittedly, they should have won the division at least once, but they didn't. And then a big coaching change happened, and that's when things fall apart. Okay, let's put this to the current Detroit Lion, Jared Goff. How does this apply? Well, like Caldwell, Jared Goff was somewhere else first. He was a starting quarterback for the Los Angeles Rams. He was the number 1 pick of the Rams, just like Matthew Stafford was the number 1 pick for the Lions. Goff played for the Rams from 2016 to 2020. In his third season in 2018, his second as a full-time starter, the Rams went to the Super Bowl. The Rams had a great defense and a great running game. Goff threw for 4,600 yards. He had 32 touchdowns and 12 interceptions that year. The following season, 2019, his numbers dropped. It was a step back. He had the same amount of yards passing, but he had 10 fewer touchdowns, only 22, and he had 4 more interceptions, 16. Also, through his career, he has averaged just over 8 fumbles a season, losing about half of them. Turnovers became more of an issue for him. And his numbers the following season, his final season with the Rams, they were similar. So that brings about the trade in 2021 for Matthew Stafford. So amongst the Lions fans, there are Goff fans, and there are Goff shade throwers out there. So those who are fans of Goff say, look at his 2022 numbers this past season, especially the second half of the season when the Lions went 8-2. Goff was 7th in the NFL this season in his rating. 7th in the entire NFL, only 6 quarterbacks better. Now let's break it down just to the NFC. We're looking at half the quarterbacks. And yes, we all know in the AFC there are more elite quarterbacks right now than there are in the NFC. But in just the NFC alone, he was tied for second in touchdowns thrown. And when it comes to interceptions, 11 players in the NFC alone had more interceptions than Jared Goff, including Matthew Stafford, who played in 8 fewer games. Now, those are the people who are for Goff. Those who are against would say, Jared Goff was so bad, the Rams gave the Lions a first-round pick to take him and eat the contract they gave him. Goff was so bad that he was benched by McVay, and the Rams started John Wolford in a playoff game against Green Bay. Now, of course, Goff had been injured that year. He had broken his thumb, I believe, and he actually came into that Green Bay game after Wolford was injured. But again, those against Goff would say, why were they starting Wolford over Goff? And Goff has averaged 5 lost fumbles a year for the past 5 years. That's a lot of lost fumbles. They'll say he's just a bridge quarterback. The Lions need to use their number 6 pick to get their quarterback of the future. You don't know when you're going to be drafting again this high. Goff can only play well with a good cast around him. But what does that mean? And is that not true of most quarterbacks? Not all, of course, right? You've got Patrick Mahomes out there, but there is only one Patrick Mahomes. And when Goff struggled early last year with the Lions, some thought, look how bad this guy is. But do you recall the 2 guys the Lions signed to be his starting wide receivers? One was cut before the season even started, and the other one played, I think, 1 game. Goff also had to learn a new system, right? So that takes time. Oh, by the way, the offensive coordinator was demoted halfway through the season, and then you started seeing a dramatic change, especially with the improvement of a rookie wide receiver and some other guys stepping up. Many of you guys are going to have opinions, and I really want to know what you think about this. So remember, please go to @MattSoltesiak on Twitter. Let me know what you think. I also want to know Dan Orlovsky's opinion on this one, right? He is uniquely positioned to answer this. Not only is he a great analyst for ESPN, Dan Orlovsky played for Caldwell both in Indianapolis and Detroit. He played for the Lions from 2005 to 2008. Then he played in Indianapolis in 2011. That was Caldwell's last year in Indianapolis. Then when Caldwell came to the Lions, he came back to the Lions. Orlovsky played from the Lions from 2014 to 2016. So he has experience with Caldwell under 2 different teams. Also, at the end of Dan Orlovsky's career, he signed with the Rams in 2017, and he was in training camp for them. Now, he didn't play for them that year, but he did play preseason games for them. So that means he was Jared Goff's backup for training camp and preseason, which means he was technically a backup for Jared Goff and Matthew Stafford, who we know were traded for each other. So what does Dan think? Can the Lions get it done with Jared Goff? Should Lions fans be careful about moving on too quickly from Jared Goff? So what do you think? Can Jared Goff do what Joe Flacco and Nick Foles did and help the team around them win a Super Bowl? 13 months ago, Matthew Stafford won his first 4 playoff games of his career, including his first Super Bowl. Can Goff do for the Lions what Stafford couldn't do with the Lions? Now, wouldn't that be some irony? Do you believe in Goff's recent improvements? This past season was Goff's second best ever, only to that Super Bowl year, which was slightly better. Also, remember, Amon-Ra St. Brown played injured through a handful of games. He missed one. He was knocked out of most of another. DJ Shark, his other top receiver, missed 6 games. That's his top 2 receivers. TJ Hawkinson was traded mid-season. His starting running back was banged up most of the season. Yet, Jared Goff seemed to only get better as the season went on, cutting down on his turnovers especially. He went 324 passes to end the season without an interception. Only 3 other quarterbacks have gone longer. And keep this in mind. General Manager Brad Holmes did say it is a lot easier to get worse at quarterback than better. Or should the Lions draft Goff's replacement this year? Use that number 6 pick, which means passing on a player in the first round that would make an immediate impact on the team on the defensive side of the ball likely. It wouldn't be unheard of move if they were to do something like this. Green Bay, when they had Brett Favre, drafted Aaron Rodgers in the first round. And Aaron Rodgers is currently their quarterback, and they recently drafted Jordan Love in the first round. And then they could do that and plan to move on from Goff potentially in a year or 2. But if you did draft a quarterback now, it's like an insurance move. You draft the young guy just in case it doesn't work out with Goff. And if he does work out, you can keep the young guy, have him as a backup. But keep in mind, you missed a chance to add a great player to your defense by getting that insurance policy. So there is a cost to the insurance policy. And does drafting a quarterback so high complicate the locker room and team culture? Think about this for a minute. What if the Packers had not taken Jordan Love and instead taken the very next wide receiver on the board? Now, you can always do draft revision and change all these things. So I just went to the very next receiver. I didn't handpick who it was, but the very next receiver that was drafted after the Green Bay Packers was T. Higgins. Could you imagine T. Higgins and Devontae Adams running routes with Aaron Rodgers under center 2 or 3 years ago? Again, is Jared Goff underappreciated by Detroit Lions fans? and maybe NFL fans at that. What is the best move for the Lions? Straight up, there's not likely a perfect answer here right now. I can see it playing out both ways, right? The only real way to know this answer is to see it play out. But what does your gut tell you? What has your eye test told you? What have you seen in the last year and a half to 2 years out of the Detroit Lions? What does that tell you? I believe the Lions should go forward with Goff this year and not draft a quarterback early. But I do think they need to draft somebody late. 4th, 5th, 6th round, 7th round. Draft a quarterback to develop. The Lions have only done that once since they drafted Matthew Stafford in 2009. I think it was Brad Kaya in like 2016, 2017. And that was a late round pick. They need to draft somebody. Just do it later. I love Jared Goff's attitude and his team chemistry. The win against Minnesota in his first season with the Lions, his first win with the Lions and Coach Campbell's first win, them celebrating on the sideline told me everything I needed to know about the culture this team was building. Now, if Jared Goff can replicate this past year, the Lions just might have a legit top 12 to 15 quarterback in the NFL. Then you can discuss an extension and stuff like that. And if it doesn't work out, well, at least the rest of your team has gotten better, and you can improve the quarterback position the following year. So again, are there parallels between Jared Goff and Jim Caldwell when it comes to the Detroit Lions? Is Jared Goff underappreciated? Do you believe Jared Goff is a quarterback capable of leading the Lions to playoff victories and potentially, dare I say it, a Super Bowl victory? Or are you convinced the quarterback position needs to be upgraded in Detroit and the first round of this year's draft is the one to do it in? Would love to hear your thoughts at Matt Soltesiak on Twitter and what you think the best direction is moving forward for the Lions. Well, folks, thanks so much for tuning in. Please subscribe to this podcast to get alerts about new episodes. And until next time, stay gritty, my friends.